that it might have been big news for the president's campaign, but it wasn't big news for voters. And we're noticing that it hasn't changed the dynamic of the race at all. President Biden approval is roughly the same as it was before the State of the Union, and the horse race between Biden and Trump in a head to head matchup is almost exactly the same as what we saw before the State of the Union. So far, it hasn't really moved the dial with the overall dynamic of the race and with the electorate.
So it's not moving the needle at all. And if we remember from the last HarrisX Forbes poll, President Biden's approval rating was in the 30s. It's staying there now. Talk about this. Is this unprecedented? Is this normal to see your approval rating hanging out in the 30s this far into your first term as you're going for re-election?
Well, Biden's approvals are steeply underwater, fairly significantly underwater. Before the State of the Union, he was at 39% approval within our poll. Right now, as of this weekend, he's at 37% approval. So that's a statistical tie. And again, before the State of the Union, President Trump was up over President Biden by about 6 points. Today, the difference is at about 4 points, roughly 52% and to 48%. So again, that's a statistical tie to what we were seeing before the State of the Union. That's why I wanted to highlight that we haven't really seen anything move the dial. The speech was seen as political. It did very well with Democrats, but it failed to move independent voters in President Biden's direction. And of course, it's been overwhelmingly rejected by Republican voters.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little more. How did the results differ based on what party you're in? And probably more importantly, how did they differ based on if you tuned into the State of the Union versus if you did not?
Sure. Well, those who are paying attention to the State of the Union uh, think in general that President Biden did slightly better than those who were not able to tune into the State of the Union. We asked a question in terms of how favorable the viewers were to what they saw, and 48% said that they had a favorable view of the president's State of the Union amongst those who watched. 52% said that they had an unfavorable view. And for the general electorate, the number was 44% favorable view, 56% unfavorable view. So, roughly within the same ballpark, but amongst those who had the opportunity to watch, and it was roughly, I would say, a little bit over than half the electorate, they have slightly better marks for President Biden than those who didn't, but not enough to move the dial.
You posed this question to voters also. Between the two choices, which way do you lean right now? First, how is this different from the question, how would you vote if the election was today?
Well, in our horse race, we tend to look at undecided. So we ask the question first and foremost with an unsure, don't know answer choice. Again, this is the horse race question in terms of who voters would pick if the election was held today. And then we push those undecideds to make a choice, to pick one of the two candidates. And then we see the way that undecideds are leaning, whether they're leaning towards Biden or whether they're leaning towards Trump. What we're seeing right now is that undecideds are roughly split 50 50. They lean a little bit more towards President Biden than President Trump. So they help close the gap between the two. But again, President Trump is ahead of President Biden. And as I mentioned, the dynamic of the race hasn't really changed to what we saw before.